I have 6 children and I've been married for 13 years. I currently work at Kaiser Permanente, where I'm a clerk in the surgery department for pre-op and post-op. After the age of 5, we moved to Wilmington, California. About a year after being back in California, my mom gave birth to my younger sister. We lived in Wilmington, California for about a year, 2 years, and then we moved to Carson, California with my grandparents. When we moved back to California, my dad ended up hanging around the wrong people, developing addictions, and one of those addictions was heroin. He was a drug addict, and that put a lot of strain on my parents' marriage. Just my dad being in and out of prison, my mom raising us on her own, and eventually that took a toll on her to where she felt that she needed to do more, but that more that she felt didn't include her children. She came into an agreement with my grandmother and left us with my grandmother while she figured out how she was going to make herself better. So she basically abandoned us. I was probably around 8 years old. After my mom abandoning us and my dad in and out of prison, it opened the door for me, not for me, but I was sexually abused as a kid. It went on for about 3 to 4 years. I didn't know at that time that that would affect me in my adulthood. Things partake as I was growing up, where I was really shy. I felt worthless, shameless. I didn't let a lot of people get near to me at that point. I was very private because I'm dealing with all these issues at such a young age. At the age of 13, I became pregnant. By 14, I had my first child. Those issues, I became very promiscuous from that point on. And I was mean. I just dealt with all these emotions, with my parents not being there and then just being sexually abused. I didn't understand why that part had happened to me. And I'm a baby having a baby, and I had no clue how to be a mom because, of course, I didn't have my mom. My grandma did the best she could as that mother role, but, she was in her older age, and I didn't know, I wasn't too receptive to her. It was just mainly okay, you're here to take care of me, life goes on, but that motherly bond I didn't have. And I didn't get that motherly bond until later in my adulthood. I was a high school dropout, so I didn't finish school until later on. I went back to school in my adulthood as well. So I didn't really have that social connection with other teenagers or friends in high school. I never had that. I never went to prom. I just never experienced those things in my life that I missed out on. And I missed out on a lot of things that now I'm able to enjoy with my own kids and to live that part that I was missing through them. I always felt like people would talk about me, people would judge me. I was like this kid in an adult body because I developed so early and so quickly that people just didn't see me as this kid. People saw me as this adult young woman and not as a child. In elementary school, I had really good friends, but then as time moved on, as this abuse happened, I started hanging out with the wrong crowd. Because my dad was in and out of prison, he lived the gangster lifestyle. So I quickly, as I began to know about it, I quickly adapted to it. So all my friends basically were either transitioning into a gang member, or there was just people hanging around with them because they wanted to be cool, or they were them. And that's where that opened up a door for me, because I was what is this about? A lot of the kids that were in these gangs either didn't have a mom or didn't have a father, or they didn't have both and were also being raised by their grandparents. So we kind of connected in that sense as this is a family bond, something that we were missing at home. We found it out in the streets. I wanted that feeling of like having parents, you know, being scolded, being told what to do. And when it came later, it was hard for me to receive that because I didn't want to hear it. It didn't, being around like the people, these kids that were in gangs, it was just like, I didn't want to hear it because they weren't being told what to do. So I didn't want to be told what to do. And it just wasn't appealing to me. But then yet at times when I was in that dark place by myself, I wish I had that. I wish my mom told me like, yeah, no, you can't go anywhere today. No, do your homework, or no, you have to go to school. I never had that. So it was really hard to like put myself in the world and be a certain way, and then at home carry myself a certain way. When I was about 13, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And my life shifted after that because it was more of, okay, when I was told that, it's like, oh my God, I'm gonna lose my mom. I didn't think of a cure. I didn't think that they could make my mom better because at that time, all you heard was cancer, you're dead. And so dealing with that, I was like, okay, like, well, when is she gonna leave me? She's gonna leave me again, but this time it's gonna be forever. But then at that time, with her diagnosis, me and my mom developed a very special bond. I was probably like about 15 after I had my son. I was going with her through all her treatments, being at every doctor's appointment, even though I didn't understand the terminology at the time of what was going on, but I was there. I was really involved in her treatments. I believe like at 15, 16, my mom taught me how to drive stick for the very first time. And it wasn't because I wanted to, it was because I had to drive her there. Like after her treatments, like I had to drive her home. She was so sick, you know, vomiting in the car to get home. I didn't even have my license at the time, but my mom just felt safe knowing that she was in the car with me, that, you know, the cops are gonna give us, you know, a leeway, you know, they're gonna let us go. It was like those moments that I began to like have compassion for our relationship. Like I began to have that motherly figure that I desired as a kid. It was like all coming to me, but it was coming at a price eventually that I was gonna have to face later. I was first introduced to Jesus when I had my first son at the age of 14. His grandparents were going to church. I kind of knew a little bit. I went a few times to know about it, but I wasn't like all holy for it because I was raised Catholic. I didn't quite understand the Catholic religion from the Christian religion, so I kind of really didn't pay too much attention. It was years later in my late 20s when I began to know about Jesus. And how I came about knowing him was at the time, me and my husband now we're friends. We were talking, and he was entering his journey about, you know, salvation, going to church. So I heard about a good month about him being saved, and I'm like, okay, like, am I gonna get invited? Like, I was like hearing all his stories, and I wanted to know. And one day he was like, hey, like, do you want to go to church? I'm like, heck yeah, I want to know what you're feeling, you know, because he was telling me all the good things that he was experiencing, and I wanted that. So he invited me one day to come to church, and I came to Praise Chapel Paramount. We were at the Madison building when I first came, and I was like, wow, it was like a big culture shock for me because I didn't know too much about, for one, like the praise and worship. I didn't know anything about that. I've never even heard a worship song at that time. So that was the first time I actually heard worship music. People were talking about salvation and then doing the altar call. And I remember that day when I was sitting in my seat, I remember I was hyperventilating. Like my heart was racing super fast. I was getting like kind of sweaty in my palms. I was nervous. I didn't understand what was going on. And as much as I wanted to get out of my seat, something was holding me in my seat. I felt like this hand just upon me, like I couldn't move, like I was super stuck. And I was kind of like in my inner voice, like, dang, like what's going on? Like I've never felt this way before. And after like a few seconds, I felt this release this release, like, okay, like I can move freely now. So I remember like the second call that the pastor did, like, is there anybody else, that want to come up and receive salvation? And at that point, I was able to get out of my seat and go to the altar and give my life to Jesus. As I was newly transformed in my salvation and being with Jesus and learning about him, it took a minute because I still had this baggage I was carrying for a long time. And then I was like trying to sort things out. Like I was dealing with my emotions and dealing with my inner demons, and at the same time dealing with the mind battles that were so like telling me like, you can't do this, this life isn't for you, you're not gonna make it. I was feeling condemned, and it took me a long time to understand like how Jesus was gonna help, heal that part of me. And I think one of the things he had to help me with was like the death of my mom, because I didn't take that too easy at the age of 19, knowing that I never got to tell her about my sexual abuse. We didn't get that chance she didn't get that chance to really show me how to be a mom. I mean, it was happening gradually, but it wasn't enough to where I felt like, oh, I can do this, I could be a mom. Life was happening so fast with her condition, and then being in remission, and then later on it coming back, and then ultimately taking her life. So it was really kind of hard to deal with that part first, is dealing with her death. It took a long time. I believe when I got saved, it took about a good 7 years for me to really deal with that. And when I finally got over that, then God began to work dealing with the sexual abuse that I experienced as a kid. And those feelings began to come out. And every time that, as I was dealing with those issues, every time I would come to church and hear a sermon, whether it be from Pastor Omar or guest visitors, they were really hitting the spot, them not knowing that I was dealing with this inside. And then I'm like, how do you know? And it wasn't that they knew, it was that God knew, and God knew what I was dealing with. Years later, the person who abused me ended up being in the hospital sick. And people were telling me that this person was there, but they didn't even know what happened to me as a child. And those 2 days that they were like trying to get me to go, I was like, no, like I'm good. And they're like, no, you have to go. I'm like, no. I was fighting with them like, no, I don't need to go. And at that moment, like 2 days after that, the Holy Spirit was just like tugging on me like, you need to go. And I didn't understand. I'm like, what the heck? Like, why are you trying to put me in that spot again? So on the third day, I finally made it a point to went to go see that person in the hospital. And as I was like getting in driving there, I'm nervous. Getting in the elevator, like I'm hyperventilating, like I kind of feel sweaty, clammy, like it almost felt like I didn't eat that whole day. And as I'm walking to the room, I'm just like, wow, like this person's really sick. And I'm asking them, they open their eyes and they see me like so stunned, like, what are you doing here? And I'm just like, that look that we both had towards each other, it's kind of crazy. Like we're both stunned that we were both in the same room after all these years. And this person really couldn't speak to me because they had a tube down their mouth. But I was, talking to them like, I didn't know how bad their condition was at that point. And so I was just asking questions like, do you know who I am? Their head was just nodding back and forth. It wasn't really their voice speaking to me, but they were nodding back and forth. One of the nurses came in, and that's how I knew how bad their condition was. And basically they were dying of cancer as well. And I was like kind of asking God on my way home, like, why did you bring me here? Like, what was it that you wanted me to see at that moment? And God didn't speak to me right away. It was like the next day went by, I made another visit, and I just saw this person deteriorating. And it kind of like all these bad memories actually turned in compassion for this person, because I knew in any day this person's gonna die. And I still didn't know at that point like what God was trying to teach me in all this. So by the third day, I found out before I even got to that person's room that either that day or the next morning they were going to go home in hospice, because basically they were just going to be sent home to die. So I go in the room, and as I walk into that room, like this overwhelming like touch just hit me, and I was like feeling nervous inside. And then all of a sudden I just started weeping, and I was like, what the heck? Why am I crying? Like, why am I crying in front of this person? And now they're like not as coherent as they were the last 2 days. I'm speaking to them like, hey, you know, this is Rebecca, can you hear me? And they're just like slowly shaking their head. And I'm like, God, like, what am I to do? And I just remember whispering in their ear and just saying, I forgive you. And I was like, wow, like those words just came out so easily. And I remember weeping over them. I remember I prayed for them, just like, God, you know, either heal them or, you know, just let this time be a recovering point for them. You know, ease their pain, ease their pain. And then I remember just praying, and then I remember just God saying, when Jesus was on the cross, just saying, you know, forgive them for they don't know what they do. And I don't even know why I said that. Then I remember just walking out just like in tears. But at that moment, God releases this heavy weight that I was like, wow, I almost missed this opportunity. Because God healed me at that point. For so many years, I was like, wow, like heavy. It was super heavy on me. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know like if I was ever going to be healed from this, because even though I was saved in church, serving God, every time like I would be in my seat, the enemy would just come against me. My mind battles, like sometimes I had to get up from my chair, go to the bathroom, pray over myself, because that's what I learned being a Christian. And then come back, altar calls, I'm on my knees, I'm crying, like, why am I dealing with this? But then after this time, I was putting two and two together. And I realized that God was preparing me for this moment. The moment that he was going to heal something in me, the moment that he was going to remove all the shame, the moment that he was just going to set me free, because nobody could set me free but him. So when I left that room that day, as I prayed and said those words, I was like, wow, like had I not listened to you, I would have never felt my freedom. I would have never gotten it. And at the same time, it was like all the anger, all the shame, all the disappointment, all the things that the enemy was telling me in my head was literally gone. Like gone. I felt so liberated that day, just leaving the room and just like, wow, God, like, I can't believe I almost missed this. No matter how hard I was fighting with myself for 2 days to come here, 3 days asking you why I'm here. And on that day, like, wow, like the weight was just gone. And now just talking about it and speaking about it, I don't carry that shame. Even though it's emotional for me, I don't feel that condemnation anymore. And people need to know that. You know, people need to know that that shame, it could be gone by just serving Jesus and allowing him to heal you, because he's the only one that can.